Hi everyone from Cologne, Germany. Welcome to over 300 registered participants on behalf of America's North Rhine-Westphalia and our trusted cooperation partners, the CASSIS of the University of Bonn, represented by Professor Ulrich Schlie, the Fachschaft Politik and Soziologie. I'm just going to say this in German. It's the student body of the University of Bonn's politics track. Then we have the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, represented by Iris Müller tonight. And special greetings also go out to our panelists of the first half of the show. Laura Coupe and Ron Nearing, live from Washington, D.C., Julius Vandeler, live from Berlin, John Doyle, live from Cologne, and our moderator, Florian Bauer, live from Cologne or Berlin. We may have to discuss this later, and other panelists will join and be introduced at a later point. Now on tonight's panel, first of all, on tonight's election, I'm not going to say anything because you're in for a treat of 2 hours of discussion and analysis and entertainment. And I think this mix is quite fitting for this whole election craze. Now, this was initially planned as an election night. We wanted to observe the elections. Then, of course, this became impossible because of the COVID pandemic. So we gathered all our resources and shifted them to tonight's post-election panel. And if I may say so myself, you're in for a treat. What a setup for tonight. It's going to be 2 hours of analysis, of discussion, and I alluded to entertainment, and I really mean this in a literal sense, so I'm excited about this. I won't say anything more at this point, maybe save for thanking my great colleagues and the great team for doing everything in the background, especially Katharina. It's always great that this works out, and I don't want to steal anything from our moderator, Florian Bauer. But speaking of whom, let me briefly introduce him. Florian is an award-winning journalist, moderator, and coach. He is a laureate of the Grimme Award and of the German TV Award. He is known for his very tough political interviews and is a regular as a political commentator for the German public broadcasting station Phoenix. For the Germans, this belongs to the ARD network, so as national and official as you can get. Besides this, he's also an expert on sports and sports politics. Why am I saying this? Because he is the master of some scoops on doping and corruption on a global scale. So he knows the art of the game of power politics, and I think that is very fitting for the current political situation. I'll leave it at that. I'm glad, Florian, always glad to have you as a partner and moderator. And I'll now hand over to Iris from the Naumann Foundation, who will say a few words before we hand over to Florian. To everyone else, just briefly, 5 minutes after the beginning, we already have almost 200 visitors. It's incredible. Everyone have a great night. And now over to Iris.
Thank you, Benjamin. And I want to welcome you, everybody, on behalf of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom to the longest election night of this year. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you have the hope that tonight you're going to hear who is going to be the next president of the United States, we probably have to disappoint you. Although, if there's going to be any breaking news in the meantime, you are not going to miss it. We will keep you up on the latest news. The election has been a nail-biter, and we are still waiting for the results. It's incredible this year, and I thank all the partners very much and all the panelists that they agreed to this very interesting discussion and also a long event for an online event. I want to switch to German now for a few words. Herzlich willkommen an alle Teilnehmer heute Abend. Wir haben eine bilinguale Veranstaltung. Wir präsentieren Ihnen heute Abend Experten von beiden Seiten des Atlantiks. Die erste Stunde wird auf Englisch stattfinden und die zweite Stunde wird auf Deutsch stattfinden. In der Mitte haben wir eine kurze Pause, sodass Sie sich nochmal ein Getränk holen können oder so. Und wir wünschen Ihnen einen interessanten Abend. Wir sind ja derzeit auch alle im Teil-Lockdown. Das heißt, wir machen das alle heute von zu Hause, wie Sie auch sehen können bei einigen der Kollegen. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen interessanten Abend. Bleiben Sie zu Hause und bleiben Sie gesund. Florian, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Benjamin. Thanks for having me. Good evening, everybody. And nail biter. That's it. I don't know about you folks, but I've been in front of the television for the last roughly 48 hours with a bit of sleep in between. And I assume that a lot of you guys have actually experienced the same over the last 48 hours. And it has indeed been a nail biter. And this right now, that moment now, it is 6:05 p.m. in Germany. This might actually be a crucial hour as Nevada and especially Clark County, so the county in Nevada with the largest share of votes, has actually is expected to give some results on the election and the votes. So we're going to stay tuned on that, as Nevada is one of the crucial states so far on this presidential election, as Joe Biden is only up, but up by 7,500 votes so far in that state. So Nevada could actually be the closer in that presidential election if we assume that the 68,500 votes ahead for Biden in Arizona are keeping up. So if you see me every once in a while divagate over my camera like that, then that's because I have CNN on there. So if anything happens, you're more than free to call and use the chat function down there and write it in there if you see it earlier than us. And if I see anything, I will bring it in here live during the next 2 hours. So this election could actually come to results tonight. If we are going to see a closing on Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, you name it, or it could well carry on for days, months, perhaps even if Donald Trump really is willing to go all the way, and we obviously want to and gonna see that. We're gonna talk about all of that during the next hour here, and then in a German session in another hour after that. But we're gonna talk about more than that, the consequences of this election for America, for Europe, but for Germany as well. Also the fallout for the American society. And on an election, we want to talk about an election which perhaps most people haven't concentrated on so far that much, which is the Senate election. And lots to discuss with lots of people. We've invited 7 experts from the US and Germany. My name is Florian Bauer, and I'm going to be your host tonight. Whenever you feel like you want to ask a question or bring a statement in here, please use the chat function, drop it in there, and we're going to have an eye on that as well. So, ready to roll. Let's bring in our first guest. He's a political campaign consultant and a communication expert. He has consulted political parties, politicians, NGOs, and companies. And during the presidential election in the US in 2008 and 2012, he has been a full-time worker on the campaign on Barack Obama. Julius von der Laar. Julius, good to have you.
Florian, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for inviting me.
Julius, what's the main conclusion you draw out of the last 48 hours of this election?
Well, I think top line, I think it's pretty much like we anticipated, right? I mean, we're always saying it was a close race. Yes, some people said it was going to be a landslide Biden win. And I think you as well, some other folks said, you know, I was pretty skeptical when it came down to Joe Biden, Democrats taking on Texas. So I think it was pretty much like we said. There was going to be the red mirage where in the beginning, the whole map was going to turn red. And then slowly but surely, you know, it was going to start eating in there. And that's exactly what's been taking place in Pennsylvania, especially. And if you want to, why don't we take a look actually into the numbers in Pennsylvania? You already started out with Nevada, but why don't we give folks a quick look into the numbers?
Please, absolutely. And while you're opening this up, I'm just bringing in what I see on television right now on CNN. So Joe Biden has obviously apparently increased his lead in Nevada from 8,000 up to 12,000 votes, which is interesting because we haven't seen any vote change during the last 24 hours, as Nevada hasn't unclosed any more votes since yesterday. So
I mean, we're taking a look at Nevada, and you should be seeing my screen right now from Nevada, right?
Yes,
you already mentioned Clark County, obviously the big county down there where Las Vegas is located. So right there, you have it, the 53-point lead to 45 points for Joe Biden is in the lead there. And I think it's critical to, just put a lantern on that it's going to be those counties where there's a large population, because if you just consider it, right, there's almost 800,000 people living in Clark County. If you compare that to, for instance, Pine County, right, there's just 4,000 people living there. And so as all those mail-in votes are getting counted, obviously it's going to be those large counties. Let's zoom out and leave Nevada for just a second and go over to Pennsylvania, because that's obviously the big prize. So we anticipate some numbers to come out maybe as early as, I listened to some folks from the Biden campaign earlier who said we might get some results as early as 6 p.m. German time, noon in the US. So that obviously hasn't happened yet. But if we zoom in here, right now, 92% of the vote is actually reported. And same thing over here. If we take a look at that, Greene County down here in the southwest corner, again, just 13,000 votes altogether there, 77% estimated right now that are counted. If we go over here to Philadelphia, I mean, obviously that's the grand prize where there's roughly 600,000 votes. Right now, still 17,000 up for grabs. Democratic Party, and I again talked to some folks from the Biden campaign, they anticipate that they're going to get roughly 7 or 8 out of 10 votes in those remaining mail-in ballots. Same thing, I think, and this is important to look at, Erie County up in the Northwest, almost up there in the Great Lakes region. I think that's fascinating to see. This is a county that Donald Trump won in 2016 by 2 points. And so let's see how that's coming in. Same thing obviously goes for Bucks County as well, down here. So Bucks County is going to be critical. That has a great split up as well. In the north, you have a pretty affluent neighborhood up in Doylestown. And if you go down further to Levittown, things change. So I think those are some exciting places to look for. And again, as we move through here and as we go through the evening, there's going to be more early votes dumped in there and more vote by mail ballots that are counted by every minute that's taking place.
Yeah. Jules, perhaps we and obviously most of you folks of the 205 which are on right now have probably watched CNN or American television over the last 48 hours as well.
I always wanted to pretend that I'm John King for just a moment. So actually, that was just for me, that for one time I got to pretend to be John King. So please, everyone, just excuse me for taking the liberty to pretend I'm on CNN. You're Wolf Blitzer right now, Florian.
Interesting. Yeah, Wolf Blitzer since my childhood. I've watched him. But anyways, I'm coming back to the bigger picture. Obviously, if Joe Biden wins Nevada, if Joe Biden wins Arizona, the race is done. It's 270 votes. In case, because the Trump campaign has focused on Arizona, and actually the gap has diminished over the last couple of hours in Arizona. It's only, quote, only 68,500 votes ahead now for Biden. But Pennsylvania, and that's what obviously the Biden campaign looks into as well, is now down to 115,000 votes where Donald Trump is ahead. So once Pennsylvania could really be flipped by Biden, that would obviously a breaker as well for Joe Biden.
Right. And I mean, remember 2016, again, different cycle, different election, different candidates, but still, that was when Donald Trump won the election by winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by roughly 70,000 votes. So again, that race was incredibly close as well. And again, this is what we're seeing right now, just on a different trajectory due to the early vote and the vote by mail.
And now, do you expect that tonight we are going to have a final, not final result, but a result which will call at least one of the two a new president?
I mean, again, I'm just talking to the Biden campaign, to friends who worked with me on the Obama campaign, who are now at headquarters as well. And what they're telling me is that they have a very good understanding of where the math is, where the vote is. So keep in mind, over the last year, pretty much, the Biden campaign has been doing millions of phone calls, millions of knock doors. So they exactly know who their electorate is. They've been doing ballot chasing operation where, again, everyone who has requested a mail-in ballot, most people have also given their data to the Biden campaign. So the Biden campaign has a very good understanding of who has voted, who has turned in their mail-in ballot. So they know what needs to be counted, and they have that in their database. Just to bring people back to the 2012 Obama campaign, I was working in Ohio back then. We're actually able to predict the vote in Ohio, again, 18 electoral votes back then, but we're able to predict the vote by 0.02% accuracy. So again, campaigns have internal data that is not accessible to us out here watching from the outside, but the campaign from the Biden campaign is incredibly optimistic. We heard Jenna Milley-Dillon, the Biden campaign manager, yesterday on a call where they said, we're very, very confident. We know the numbers and everything is on the path, on the trajectory for a Biden win in Pennsylvania. It might be slight, but we're on that trajectory.
I just want to bring in one information which I received from a friend of mine from New York about 2 hours ago. And he said that he has spoken to the Biden campaign himself, like he's spoken to a friend of him from the Biden campaign, and they are looking actually into still flipping Pennsylvania, which, just to remind everybody, Trump is still ahead by 150,000. Right. And they're also looking into flipping Georgia, which yesterday nobody would have ever looked into even. But now Biden is down in Georgia, 18,500 an hour ago. And I'm just looking at the stats right now, and it's now 14,000. So the Biden campaign said they might be able to flip both of these states. First question, is that really something you could see as well? And second, what could that mean at the end if then they really going to flip these two states plus win Arizona plus win Nevada?
Right. I mean, I pulled up Georgia. You should be able to see it right now. DeKalb County, this is where, of course, where Atlanta is located, one of the big counties down there. But again, it's incredibly close down here. Take a look right there, 13,000 votes, just like you mentioned. So again, what's happening in Georgia is even though a large chunk of the vote is already counted, there's an operation that's taking place, which is what they call a vote healing operation. So again, just to bring folks into this, and this is again coming from the Biden campaign, what they're doing is a lot of those mail-in ballots, right? You sign the mail-in ballot just like you would in most countries. And now some election officials might say, well, actually, your signature might not be matching, right? When you register to vote, there's a different signature than what you're sending in on the ballot right now. So what they're doing is they're recontacting all those people who voted by mail-in ballot and say, well, sign an affidavit saying this is actually you, so that your mail-in ballot can be counted. And there's a massive operation taking place right now that people, again, try to heal, try to correct their ballot. And again, this is absolutely legal. The Biden campaign is putting tremendous emphasis on this. Some ballots are still being counted, but the other aspect is to make sure that every vote is counted, that people actually get a chance to vote. So I think this is how Georgia might still get turned. Obviously, if Georgia turns blue, since that's going to be the race for Biden as well. But I think there's one more interesting aspect, and that is, of course, all the recount course that President Trump might take. Right? He said and tweeted, I think 2 hours ago, he said, "Stop counting." Actually, if we were to stop counting, I don't think it would be particularly beneficial to him at this moment. But I think there's some people who said, well, he should take it to the Supreme Court. And he actually said himself yesterday morning in that statement that he was going to take it to the Supreme Court. I think it's critical to say that you can't just directly go to the Supreme Court. But what you can do, and this is absolutely legitimate and also legal, is that you say, well, I want a recount, just like what happened in 2000 when George W. Bush and Al Gore went at it in Florida, when in the end 537 votes decided the state of Florida. So there's a threshold in most states, for instance, in Wisconsin, that if there is a difference between Joe Biden and Trump in absolute vote count of less than 1%, you actually have the right to ask for a recount. In this case, Donald Trump could ask for it if the margin is less than 1%, but he would actually have to pay for it, and that price tag is $3 million. I would imagine that the Trump campaign can come up with that money, but that would mean that, again, it would come to a recount, and if there should be some irregularity, of course, he could file suit. And if that gets bumped up to the Supreme Court, then we would have a Supreme Court case that might be able to drag on for some while. But I think that's the state of the race right now.
Perhaps at the end, can you give us an insight? I mean, you've obviously been on the Obama campaign in 2008 and 2012. So what are the two campaigns now? What's the kind of interior mood at these campaigns now, if you'd be in their shoes now?
So again, I don't know what the president or his team are going through right now. I mean, you can sort of read at least some portion of what they're thinking when you follow the Twitter account of the Trump campaign and President Trump's account. But I think the Biden campaign was pretty smart in the way they handled this. I saw some commentary on German TV when they were saying, well, why is Biden coming out earlier with a statement? And why is such a short statement? I thought that was actually pretty effective, that he came out and sort of set the narrative that every vote should get counted, that they feel confident that if every vote is counted, then they should actually be up. So again, I think they're trying to do a preemptive strike there, setting the narrative for the election. Then of course, the president came out, and then in the afternoon on the day after the election, on November 4th, there was actually a full briefing with Jen O'Malley Dillon and Bauer, the election attorney for the Biden campaign, who was a former White House counsel on the Obama years and Obama's election protection attorney as well. And they said, I mean, they pretty much have all the jets on the runway, fueled up, engines running. They're ready to go wherever there might be a challenge in any one of those states. So again, Biden internal numbers, at least this is what they're saying, are looking pretty confident for them. They believe that they can pull it out. But if it were to come to a recount, I think the Biden campaign is up for it. And just let me put out this one data fact. They raised $380 million just in September, $380 million in their war chest. And they actually were not able to spend all that money on digital ads, on TV, on staff. So they still have $200 million on cash, hand on cash on hand, right? It's been a long couple of hours. But they have $200 million cash on hand. So if it were to get into a legal battle, and more importantly, if it were to become a battle of public opinion, right, a campaign after the campaign, they have pretty deep coffers where they can spend some money on making sure that they organize people, that they stage protests in case they feel like this election might get taken from them. So just to keep that in mind, if this might get dragged out, which again, I assume this is going to be over when the race is called today. But if not, if it were to get dragged out, they have the resources, and I think they have done the planning in order to keep up with whatever comes their way.
Julius van der Laar, political campaign consultant and communication expert. Thanks, Julius, very much for your expertise, your insights here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, so folks, let's now talk with both sides of the election, and let's start with the Democrats' voice. Our next guest is a congressional staffer in the House of Representatives, where she works on the Committee on Homeland Security for the Democratic majority. She's a former Obama presidential appointee, and she has worked also at the White House. She was born in Germany. She speaks fluent German and graduated from the University of Michigan. So she knows one of the battleground states, at least until yesterday, during the last 2 days at least, by heart. Joining us from Washington, D.C., welcome, Laura Cooper.
Hi Florian. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi Laura, good to have you. Laura, how does the election play out now for you as a Democrat in your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think like everyone mentioned and Julius mentioned as well, that at least to me, as someone who's from Michigan, I'm not totally shocked by the outcome. So I grew up right outside of Detroit in what people would call a purple district. So I kind of have seen the diversity of the US and people's different opinions. So I'm not completely shocked. I think when it came to the congressional map, in terms of the Senate, right now we know it's not conclusive if the Democrats will win the Senate, but it looks like in Georgia it might look like two seats might go off to a runoff. So that has increased the hope. But again, we're waiting on the final tally in terms of the 2 races in Georgia, and then the 2 Senate races in Georgia. And then when it comes to the House, right now it looks like that the Democratic majority might lose a couple seats. So I think that has surprised some folks, but we'll see how because we're still waiting on the results of some of the House races. So it looks like the majority in the House will lessen by a couple of seats. And then I think in terms of the presidential, I mean, as of right now, like as we're all waiting, I think in terms of the outcome, I'm speaking in terms of my personal opinion, I kind of also suspected that it would be close, but I'm very, I would say I was very excited, especially since I'm from the state of Michigan. The turnout in Detroit was historical, especially among Black voters. The turnout was 53% higher than it was in 2008. And I know that vote was critical to Joe Biden winning that state, and also Senator Gary Peters keeping his seat, because he was able to keep his seat by a small margin. And we're also waiting to see what happens in Atlanta.
Laura, let me share a photo which a friend of mine from the US has sent me on 28th of October. So that's about a week ago. It's a photo of the polls at that day, so a week ago. And it's basically blue all over the place, but it's not only blue, it also says Biden ahead by +9%, +11%, +7%, +6%. And it talks about the states we've just talked about with Julius. So it talks about Nevada, talks about Wisconsin and Michigan, which now are in favor of Biden, but they weren't until yesterday afternoon. It talks about Pennsylvania, Biden +6, talks about Arizona, and so on and so forth. Where I want to go here is obviously, how could that happen that Joe Biden actually did lose that many votes during the last week ahead of the election?
So I don't think that he actually lost those votes. I think now a big thing that a lot of, especially in DC, are realizing it's that these polls are not the most accurate. And also in terms of when people do those surveys or those polls, the people that they might talk to may not actually be honest about who they're voting for. So I think now, I think given those trends, that there will be less confidence in those types of polls, and that I would say that parties probably are more so going to be listening to people on the ground and organizers to get a true feel of the temperature of what voters are thinking.
What are you making out of, obviously, what Donald Trump does right now and questioning the mail-in ballots, which he has done over the last couple of months already, but now not only questioning, but also starting a couple of legal actions against this vote?
Well, I'm first of all just very much concerned about the state of American democracy, because not only are we hearing these comments by the president about not necessarily recognizing the results or trying to challenge what the voters want, but also another thing that is part of America's history is voter suppression, making voting difficult, especially for folks of color and specifically Black people, especially in the South. So overall, his comments do not help, especially when we've seen the highest voter turnout in American history, which I'm comforted by. I'm very excited by the fact that Americans, regardless of what their views are engaging in the democratic process. And I definitely believe that their votes need to be counted and their voices need to be heard, especially given that the volume was so striking, even during a pandemic.
So let's pretend Joe Biden is going to win tonight. What's going to happen tomorrow?
That's a very good question. I mean, at first we'll see if President Trump will concede. So I think that that'll be a reality. But just in terms of what
you think so? You think so?
That will depend on. He would have to concede, of course, for things. I would say the transition to really be, a smooth one, or I mean, we'll see about that. But in terms of if Biden were to win, his focus will be on building his government and making sure, like building his transition team and making sure that whoever he has part of his government is ready to start on day one. So that will definitely get started behind the scenes so that he's ready to govern, because there's a lot of policies that he didn't agree with that the Trump administration furthered during the Trump presidency. So he'll be thinking about getting ready to do the work and finding the people, making sure people that are ready to be cabinet secretaries are ready to go, and making sure that he can get to work starting on, once after the inauguration takes place again, of course, but the work basically begins then once it's announced.
You seem to be reluctant to say that Joe Biden is going to be the next US president.
Oh, I mean, I think the path is there. As someone who's worked at a think tank, I tend to wait for the facts. So I think the path, he has a very strong likelihood of that happening. So basically, the Biden team is ready to start planning the transition and building their cabinet.
So you're reluctant to say he's going to win?
I'm not. I mean, here's the thing. I guess it is also, I'm a lawyer, so I play with facts. So my hope is that he will win, and it looks like it will. But I like everybody, I want to see it certified.
All right. Second question, which was involved, but you didn't quite answer it, is I was asking what's happening tomorrow, and then you started with the agenda of Joe Biden. Once Joe Biden gets elected today, right, what's happening tomorrow, and you started with the agenda. Is that what you think is going to happen tomorrow if Joe Biden might be the winner, or might be turning out as becoming a winner tonight? Is that what you expect to be happening tomorrow and the next couple of days, to have talks about a future agenda, or is there rather more and more and more and never-ending discussions about that election?
Well, I think time will, to be honest, there will be multiple factors surrounding that. But I think definitely if once he's announced, I'm sure he will address the nation, and I think his priority is unity. So I think he'll definitely communicate a message related to that. I think and the reason why I hesitate to say what's going to happen, for one, is, again, we don't know, what especially in terms of, since the United States is so segmented, what media, what maybe Fox News is telling its followers and MSNBC is telling its followers. So I think the responses are going to be very dependent on different factors and how people process the news. But I do hope that the US media is very responsible in communicating that the results are final, so that whoever receives that information will accept it and hopefully, respond accordingly, like we have before when there has been a transfer of power.
What would you say if I ask you what's the main thing you wish for whoever becomes the next US president?
Well, the first thing that I want is a president who will take the corona pandemic very seriously, especially in terms of the communities that have been very much impacted by the way that this administration has mismanaged it. So Black communities were hit very hard initially by the wave of the coronavirus. So I grew up outside of Detroit. Detroit was hit extremely hard by the pandemic. I know people that have lost loved ones. So I personally want a president who will take this very seriously, and rely on science and using, the expertise of scientists to get this under control. And then also I want a president that will share a message of unity and saying that he will work on behalf of everyone, because this previous administration has used very toxic language, divisive language, particularly targeting communities of color. And I look forward to the day where that will no longer be the norm. And again, that's why I'm very optimistic about a Biden victory, and to no longer having to experience some of that language, because it's been devastating to certain communities.
All right, Laura, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. Laura Cooper, working at the House of Representatives, German roots. I don't know if you want to say a couple of words in German. I think a huge part of our, at the moment, 223 participants are probably German.
Ja, also hallo alle. Also ich glaube, eine Botschaft, die ich wirklich schicken möchte, ist, dass also schwarze Wähler haben nach meiner Meinung die Demokratische Partei gerettet, und wir sahen das in Michigan, und die sind wirklich also an die amerikanische Demokratie, also die glauben daran und die sind sehr, sehr investiert, und deswegen sahen wir die Nummern in Detroit. Und auch vielleicht werden wir in Georgia vielleicht sehen, ob der Joe Biden dort gewinnen wird. So, ich würde sagen, ihr müsst auf schwarze Wähler ein bisschen mehr aufpassen und mehr über die schwarze Community oder Gemeinschaft mehr lernen, weil im Moment sieht es aus, dass sie den US-Präsident jetzt wirklich also gewählt haben. So das ist meine Botschaft. That's my message.
All right, thank you, Laura. We are going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and more in the second hour of our discussion. We're going to have an expert on that here as well. It is going to be in German, but you're always welcome, obviously, to stay tuned with us. Laura Cooper, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, before we're going to go over to the other side, to the Republicans, I'm just going to share what I've seen over my camera here on CNN. They've actually, I wouldn't go that far and saying like they've actually confirmed what we've just discussed here, but they are actually just reporting that the Biden campaign is very positive, winning Pennsylvania with a decent amount of votes. So that's basically what we've spoken about a couple of minutes ago, and what I've heard from my friend from New York 2 hours ago. So let's head over to the Republicans, and our Republican guest is a political strategist. He's worked as the chair of the Republican Party in California, and with Ted Cruz's 2016 presidential election campaign. He's a director of international training at the Leadership Institute, and he's joining us now as well from Washington, D.C. Ron Nehring, good to have you, Ron.
Danke.
Ron is also good in German, but we're going to stay in English in that first hour. Ron, how hard is that election for you, being a Republican? And you might have noticed that it's kind of like a double-sided question.
Yeah, so certainly it's better to be the party in power. However, I would say that these results are somewhat split, at least when it comes to the down ballot election performance. So I think this was always going to be a tough race for President Trump. As you mentioned earlier, I was the presidential campaign spokesman for Senator Ted Cruz. We went up against Donald Trump in the primaries in 2016, and then of course went on to see him win against Hillary Clinton. I think the biggest drawback of this election for the Republican side is that we didn't get to run against Hillary Clinton again. That probably would have been a better outcome.
True, and you've brought us a little presentation. Feel free to shoot that now, and
Sure.
Whenever you folks have any questions. I've seen one question which I'm going to divert to Ron in a second after his presentation.
Okay, so here we go. I put a couple of slides together. I just couldn't help myself. Given that I work as a lecturer and a trainer with great frequency. So I would start with, and by the way, for anyone who wants to reach me, here's my email address, ron@ronnehring.com. Here's a little bit of background. And by the way, I'll provide you with a copy of this presentation, and you're welcome to share it with any of your great viewers we have today. I borrowed this line from Star Wars because I think it's very fitting in that this is not the election that many people were looking for. I disagree with one of the earlier speakers in that all of the American press for several weeks were filled with this is going to be a Biden landslide, the Republican Party is going to be destroyed and decapitated, and so on. And this election just did not live up to that hype. And also, we did not see a lot of the other things that were being expected, violence and all types of mayhem and mass confusion and so on. So it's a very good day for American democracy and a very bad day for for Russian and outside interference in America's elections. Here's where we stand as of now. About 140 million votes were cast. That is the highest voter turnout in America in 112 years. I think higher voter turnout is good. I think that's a result of having a very polarized society right now. And I expect that the advantage right now is for Joe Biden to be the next president. If he doesn't even need Pennsylvania in order to do it, if Arizona and Nevada are certified, and then he holds on to Michigan and Wisconsin, he's going to hit the 270 votes needed to win the majority in the Electoral College. And he and his vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, will become president and vice president. Part of the surprise that, how this election did not meet expectations is that Republicans are expected to hold control of the United States Senate. And this is having an impact already on Joe Biden's transition plans, because some of the people who he probably would nominate for various cabinet posts are just not going to make it through a Republican-controlled Senate. So this does have a major impact, because under our system, the United States Senate has to confirm all of the senior level appointments in the administration. So when you are coming in with a Republican Senate from one party, and if Joe Biden is the president, some of his transition plans are going to have to be adjusted accordingly. There are 4 Senate seats that have not yet been called, North Carolina, Alaska, and then the 2 seats in Georgia, one of which might go to a runoff, but I expect Republicans are going to hold control of the Senate. In the House, we have another surprise. It was widely expected that the Democrats would expand their majority, and instead, so far, it's shrunk by 5 votes. This means that the Democrats will have a majority, but it's smaller, and that could set the stage for Republicans having a good year in 2022, because the midterm elections, particularly in the House, tend to go better for the opposition party. So the Democrats do not have a gigantic majority to work with in the House going forward. A number of the seats that you see in gray on the screen right here have not yet been called. When we look at governors, there were a number of governor seats which are up. The only one change, it was a Republican pickup in Montana, so that's good news for us. This really matters because not necessarily Montana for this purpose, but because of the census, which is done every 10 years, all of the state legislative lines and all of the congressional lines are about to be redrawn. And the party which controls the state government tends to draw those congressional lines to their advantage. So it would have been very much to Republican disadvantage if we had lost some governors or some state legislatures, and so far that has not happened. So if Joe Biden wins, then interestingly enough, here are a couple of things that you may not realize. Number one, if he wins, he will be the first newly elected Democrat president to not win both houses of Congress since 1884. Every other Democrat president since 1884 came in with a Congress completely of his party. So if Joe Biden is president, he's going to come in without that, which means that his legislative agenda, as well as the appointments in his administration, are going to be different. Secondly, there was no big blue wave. And the fact that we're still discussing the results of the election now, and it's not clearly known, is indicative of that. But more importantly, you did not have the gains in the House. You did not have Democrats taking over the Senate. Democrats spent $315 million competing in 6 Senate seats and lost all of them. So the underlying trend was not favoring the Democrats, as was predicted. We gained seats in the House. Republicans almost certain to retain control of the Senate and have that redistricting advantage. So final slide, a couple of interesting points. Number one is, in this campaign, we saw 2 very different campaign strategies go head to head. The Biden team was out to try to build to a majority and peel off those people who like Donald Trump on policy, but are not thrilled with his behavior. The Trump campaign strategy was more based upon believing, and correctly so to a degree, that there are a certain number of people out there who support Donald Trump who are not very political. They may not even be registered to vote at the beginning of the election cycle. They don't watch 10 hours a day of cable television. And their goal was to activate those people on the same issues that brought Donald Trump a victory 4 years ago. So typically in American politics, you see 2 similar campaign strategies competing to see who's more effective. Here you had 2 very different strategies. COVID was a major, major issue, and I think that it affected the ultimate outcome of the election. Here for a variety of reasons, part of which is that it most dramatically affects elderly people, as we all know. And what do we know there? And that is that with 100,000 new cases a day, who's going to be most concerned? It's going to be our elderly voters. That's a demographic group which Donald Trump won 4 years ago. The polling was right and the polling was wrong. The area where the polling was right is that it did show certain trends that we see. We saw a surge in support for President Trump among Latino voters. He had a surge of support among African-American men. These are not gigantic numbers, but it was a higher number than was originally expected. But the general election outcome that was predicted that this would be some, slam dunk for the Democrats did not materialize. There's a more diverse Republican electorate, but I say this time, and that's because the president did win some non-traditional voters who other people would not have predicted that he would win. And Florida demonstrates that. Republicans not only won the state of Florida, but picked up 2 congressional seats, and that's because Cuban-American voters came back to the Republican Party and supported the Republican candidates. An area of concern for Republicans is the Southwest. As of right now, the Democrats are winning every single state in the Southwest except for Utah. That's a challenge going forward, and that's probably reflective of the Republican Party's need to do better among Latino voters. And then finally, and this is my last point, what didn't happen? We didn't have violence in the streets. We didn't have mass mayhem, mass confusion, etc. Overall, this has been a relatively trouble-free election. You have not had mass amounts of voter fraud. You have not had big efforts to try to cause mayhem in the aftermath. The system is working well under pressure, and I think that's a very, very positive thing. And it's a bad day for those foreign adversaries, particularly Russia, which is always trying to delegitimize and raise questions about American elections. So they didn't get what they wanted at all. So I hope you found that useful. That was my way of kind of jamming 20 kilograms of potatoes into a 5-kilogram satchel. And with that, I'll throw it back to you. Thank you, Florian.
Right, Ron. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts and giving us more insight on the election in general as well. That's very helpful. But nevertheless, we obviously can't let you go with obviously the question which you have kind of touched on already with your last point when you were saying there haven't been any riots so far, any huge demonstrations, although we are seeing demonstrations today from both sides in a lot of different states. But the main question obviously remains, as Donald Trump is filing lawsuits in, as far as I've seen it, Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, to finally, at the end, overturn the results. How do you see that? How do you see his speech right after or right in the election night at 2 a.m. When he was talking about going to the Supreme Court, and couldn't that all lead at the end to the demonstrations, to the riots, which you were just pointing out you haven't seen yet?
So my short answer to that is I don't think any of that is going to happen. So let me now address the specific points that you raised. One is that no one's going to court to overturn any results because there are no results. Results are final typically about 30 days after the election. So typically what will happen is that you'll have observers who are watching what's going on, and then if something is improper or might be improper, one side or another will go to court to try to stop something from happening. So an example of that was the Trump campaign went to court in Michigan yesterday to allow their observers into a polling accounting facility in Detroit where they had been kept out until then. So that what they would do is they go to court, ask a judge to say, please stop the counting because we need to be able to have observers in there and so on. So that has nothing to do with overturning anything. It's being able to protect the transparency of the process. In other cases, for example, the Trump people went to court in Georgia because a poll worker had indicated that some ballots which were delivered after the polls closed, which is not legal under Georgia law, were coming in and being mixed in with ballots that were received beforehand. And so the Trump people went to court to say, can we have those separated so that in the event those ballots are found to not have been cast legally, that they can be set aside and you don't throw out the entire election, et cetera. So it's those type of things that are happening. It's not to overturn the outcome, it's to see that the proper format is being followed. That having been said, I think at the end of the day, I think this looks like this is Joe Biden's election, but it's perfectly normal. This is nothing unusual, and this is an important point which Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made today. There's nothing abnormal about what we have seen so far. Ballots are being counted. It's a big, complicated country. Occasionally, people go to court to see that the rules are being adhered to properly as it relates to counting and transparency, and that's normal. In terms
sorry,
of
Ron, what you haven't seen, sorry to interrupt there, Ron, but like what we haven't seen yet in US history, you correct me if I'm wrong, is a US president calling himself the winner at a night where none of the votes have shown any winner yet. And the US president, who also in front of the camera says that he will go to the Supreme Court. I'm just quoting him, going to the Supreme Court and I was obviously not quoting it correctly, not to overturn the vote, but obviously bring the votes in his favor.
Yeah, so a couple things. Number one is that people can declare themselves the winner or not. Anybody can do that. It doesn't really matter. And that is that the winner is determined by the individual states when the votes are certified. So I was watching the president live on election night when he made those statements, and I think that he jumped the gun on that. So number one, if he's looking at the results as they stood at that particular time, he was leading in 3 states. At the time the president said that, he was leading in Wisconsin, he was leading in Michigan, and he was leading in Pennsylvania. However, there are many votes that were still to be counted at that time, and you've seen the results in 2 out of those 3 states change since then. In terms of appealing anything to the Supreme Court, there's nothing to go to the Supreme Court about at this point, and that is that there's a legal system that may or may not result in a case going to the Supreme Court, like we saw in 2000 with the Bush versus Gore recount. But so far, there's no case that has really gone in that direction. So I think the president was, kind of, speaking inarticulately at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on election night.
Do I understand you right that you actually expect the president to step down if the results, may it be tonight or tomorrow, be as clear as Joe Biden can be called the winner of that race?
Well, if you're asking if I think the president will accept the outcome of the election if he doesn't win the election, yes. What is he going to do? Just sit in the White House and refuse to leave? I mean, yes, the president is going to accept whatever the result of the election is, and I expect that Joe Biden will do that as well.
How far are the Republicans willing to go with that president in case he is not doing what you just said, in case he is not stepping down, not accepting the result?
That's a hypothetical, which, I really think that possibility has been vastly overplayed, particularly in the international media, even more so than in the domestic media here. Look, the president knows that he was in a tough re-election fight. His comments on election day, which he made from his campaign headquarters, reflected that. And this is someone who, as he said himself, winning is easy and losing is hard, particularly for him. But at the end of the day, when the result is known and all of the ballots have been counted, then he's going to accept the results. Of course, he would prefer that he be the winner, obviously. But this notion, this fantasy that the president is going to, lock the door to the Oval Office and hide under the couch and and not leave if he loses is just ludicrous. So American democracy is safe and secure, and we will have a peaceful transition of power either to a second Trump term or to President Joe Biden on January 20th.
Ron, this is actually the moment where I just have to tell Benjamin and Iris that we have to schedule another meeting with you, maybe in December or January, in case anything different is going to work out what you just said, and then we're going to have you back on another webinar online session. But let me just bring one other question from one of our viewers and one of our participants in here. The question is, if Biden wins and the Republicans maintain the Senate majority, which you just insinuated, what's next?
Well, I think there are a couple things that have to be kept in mind. Number one, so I think it's very likely Republicans are going to hold control of the Senate, which means that a variety of things that Joe Biden wants to do are not going to happen. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, he is going to have to keep in mind that he will not be able to appoint anyone who is controversial with conservatives to his cabinet. That's not going to happen. However, the Republican senators understand that we have to have a government, and I would expect that when Joe Biden puts forward, typical mainstream Democrats who are not controversial to fill the cabinet positions, I think they will go through without a problem. But more controversial people, I think, will have a problem or be prevented outright. Secondly, is that anything requiring legislation is going to have to win the support of the Republicans in the Senate. And that Republican caucus will stick together. And that means that we're going to have a negotiating process, which, by the way, is not unlike what happens when the CDU and the SPD have to sit down and form a grand coalition. So it's not some disaster, not some end of the world. For most of American history, you've had divided government, meaning for most of American history, you have a president of one party and at least one house of Congress is controlled by another party, and they have to work things out. So no president wants to start their term with the other party in charge of one house because they would like to be able to do whatever they want. But when Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, keep in mind that his biggest accomplishment in his first year was the Tax Reform Act of 1981, the biggest tax cut in American history until that point. And that was passed by a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. So it can happen, and it will happen.
So I'm hearing that there might be more bipartisanship after January 21st.
Well, there'll have to be bipartisanship in order to get anything through Congress and in order to staff up the administration. That's certainly, that's for sure. And if it's Joe Biden, Joe Biden was a member of the Senate, since like 1492 and understands the legislative process very well and has a lot of relationships with people in both parties. And so I think he'll be successful in being able to staff up his administration and move forward many elements of his legislative agenda. But I think certain items like tax increases and so on are not likely to occur. They're not going to get through a Republican Senate.
I was just going to say that's a positive outlook from a Republican on a possible Democratic next U.S. president, except your last comment. But Ron Nehring, thank you very much, Director at the Leadership Institute, Republican. Great to have you here. Thanks for answering all the questions. And I have kind of like a gut that we might see you again on one of the webinars over the next couple of months here. Ron, good to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, and that leads us straight to our last session in that English part. So whoever is early on the German part, that's going to start in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to switch back in German for 1 minute. Für jeden, der möglicherweise jetzt schon da ist und auf den deutschen Teil wartet, wundern Sie sich nicht. Wir sind etwas in Verzug mit dem englischen Teil. Bleiben Sie gerne dran und in etwa 10, 15 Minuten sind wir dann auch im deutschen Teil und diskutieren natürlich intensiv über die US-Wahl und die Auswirkungen. So we're back in English and we're back with, excuse me, and we're back with a little break in a different way. It's not a break to switch off, but let's welcome John Doyle. Hi, John, first of all.
Hi, how are you?
John, thank you very much for being with us, being American, but being in Cologne right now. John, you were born in New Jersey. You came to Germany lots of years back as a journalist, and now you're working as a stand-up comedian and author of books describing your experiences of an American, a US American in Germany. So what were your experiences during the last 48 hours as a US citizen in Germany?
It was actually quite exciting. I mean, I think I've had a mixture. My feelings over the last couple of days have been a mixture of extreme fatigue watching television and extreme nervousness. So the nervousness was kind of keeping me awake. Every time my body wanted to sleep, you know, I had this terrible thought that if I fall asleep, I'd miss something important and miss possibly something historic. So I just stayed awake and yeah, so it's been stressful, but it's been really interesting. And I've been in Germany for 30 years now, and I still feel, especially during moments like these, American. So it was quite fun. And listening to the two political sides, I found that they were two sides that I could live with, right? I didn't feel like getting a gun or, you know, anything like that. And yeah, I'm also optimistic that America is going to come out on the other side of this.
When you were listening to the two, was that what you were hearing over the last year or two, or even 4 years of the Trump administration? And is that kind of like the new normal after tomorrow?
I don't know. I mean, I think that if Biden doesn't win, if Biden loses the Electoral College, which I don't think he will, but if he does and he wins the popular vote again, I think there's going to be a huge problem in the country. There's going to be a huge problem in the country. I think that the election is kind of something where it's like Christmas, and half of the country is not going to get as a Christmas present what it wants, right? So if you're a Republican and Joe Biden wins, it's like you're expecting to get a snowmobile or something like that as a Christmas present, and you get a book about gender pronouns. So I think whoever wins, there's going to be a portion of society that's extremely disappointed, and I hope not violent. That's my big goal, right? Not violent. And I think that's something we're going to have to wait and see. We may not have entered that phase yet. I mean, I think we had the phase of voting, and now we have the phase of counting, and pretty soon we'll have the phase of the lawyers. And I hope we don't at some point go into the phase of, hey, you know, you have a gun, I have a gun, you know, let's meet, you know, at 2 p.m. and, you know, settle this once and for all. So I don't think it's going to get to that, but, you know, I'm nervous. I'm nervous.
I mean, you obviously, I see your humorous character triggered here. Can I trigger that a bit more? I mean, that presidential campaign, I mean, that must have been a beauty for you, like having two old white men, one quote Sleepy Joe, the other one is just Donald Trump. I don't know if we're gonna have a term like that in the future where you just call someone being a Trump and everybody knows straight away what that means. How is that for you as a comedian, and what will you be lacking over the next couple of years?
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem. I mean, I voted for Biden. I voted for Joe Biden. So I'm actually voting against my interests as a comedian, because I think that there's probably more comedy material with Donald Trump. Of course, if Joe Biden falls asleep at a press conference, I guess I could maybe get some comedy material there or something like that. Or if Kamala Harris starts crying or something, she always seems like she's very close to crying when she's answering a question. There could be some humor in that, right? You know, we could all have everybody hug and that sort of thing and get over the problem. But I think I'd be willing to have to work harder as a comedian to get Biden jokes. I'd be willing to accept working harder if Biden wins. Yeah, it's been a very, for comedy, it's been good. For comedy, I had this one joke where President Trump said during a press conference, he said, You know, we have to make sure that the dangerous people who want to harm America don't enter the country. And I said, Mr. President, it's too late. You're already there. And you know, I think there's humor on both sides of politics. I think you just have to look for it and try and be honest.